Guys, want to make a video just talking about knives, of course. Um, why knives? Like when I first got into knives heavily, maybe 10 years or so ago, I had first learned like, wow, like there's a hobby for knives, and it kind of blew my mind. It's like, okay, I guess, but it would seem like it's just a simple tool. It's a sharp edge to cut stuff with. And you don't really think, or at least I didn't think, that there could be so many facets to the hobby. Um, First of all, I mean, it's just a useful tool. So I have always said that I think everybody likes knives, they just don't know it. So maybe they don't like them to the extent that we like them, but I think everybody likes knives. It's like inherent to our beings almost to like a useful tool. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it is. Carrying this today, the Para 2 Sprint Run in 204p, I believe. Anyways, which brings me to my next point. I mean, there's so many different kinds. So when you're thinking, well, how could there be a hobby? Well, traditional, so you've got like your slip joints and possibly like a friction folder. And then you've got your locking folders. And then with that, just in the locking folders category, you have all your different locks. Lock back, liner lock, frame lock, compression lock, axis lock. There's a bunch of them. The ball cage lock. And, you know, that in itself, like if somebody wanted to, you could just like acquire a small collection of just different type of knives. And of course you have your fixed blades, large, small, and I mean, it's just, the list could go on and on and on, and then that's when you start to realize that, well, yeah, this could be a hobby. And then you can even break it down a little bit more from that and say, well, like steel. Like I can find a good knife at a good price, but do I compromise steel? Maybe so, maybe not so, you know? Because it's not to say like some of the low end, like even the Chinese 8CR13 MOVs are bad steel. You just have to sharpen them more. They're a little more prone to corrosion and stuff. So I usually feel like in the knife world, not always, up to about $150 to $200. You could maybe even extend that on to $400, but even at that case, I think $400 might be teetering. What I'm saying is, I feel like you get what you pay for up until about $400 or $500. You could say almost 200, and then anything over 200 is like extravagant, maybe rare materials that really don't add much to the usability. But I'm just gonna say like 400 to 500 because like the Sabenza rides in that range, and then like the Striders and such. So, but you get what you pay for. I mean, I think when you go over 500, you're hitting on an entirely different facet, and that's the facet that some people, especially who are newer to knives, and you could almost apply it to anything collectible. It's more about how rare it is. Is it handmade? Is it custom made? What materials are in the handle, or the blade steel? You know, and then on top of that, to add another facet to the hobby, the maker. Like, is the maker still making those knives? Have they stopped? Like, a custom art knife from Hinderer would be extremely hard to track down. So like that's where the hobby part would come in, is into figuring all that stuff out and doing your research and homework. And even that, like I'm in the wine business, and a lot of people who really dig wine like as a hobby, they get into like the families and the regions of where it's made and how it's made, what run of what year, how it was aged, in what barrel, did it get pulled out of that barrel early and then steel aged, and then, you know, so all hobbies have their own facets, and it's just funny that you don't see that from the outside when you first get started, or most people don't. I didn't till I got into it. I mean, at first, I thought all Spydercos were just ugly ducklings, and just, wow, why would anybody ever, like, want a knife with a big old hole in it? And then that's another facet. Well, a tool seems to become, maybe just knives, but they seem to become a little bit more attractive and hobby-like when you can appreciate how useful they are. So at first you may think the Spyderco is ugly, but after you flick it even 2 or 3 times, put some gloves on, use it, you understand the hole is and why it's there and why you would desire a knife, you know, with a hole in it, like Spyderco. So there's so many different facets to the hobby, and if you wanted to, and most of us do, most of us are a conglomerate of all the different interests. You could get into like the blade steels, the exotic stuff, keep up with the latest and greatest, and then you could even break that down into knife testing, not only acquiring the exotic steels, but actually taking them out, using them, and cutting stuff with them and seeing how they stack up to your other knowledge base of what you already know. And then the other hobby, I mean, there's so many different like micro hobbies inside the hobby. The other one could be like going on YouTube and trying to learn and watch footage of somebody else cutting stuff and see what their opinion is and see if their data point matches up to your data point, you know. And of course, after you do all that cutting, you have to sharpen. So that is, if somebody wanted to, and I'm sure a lot of people do, you could be like treat sharpening as a hobby in and of itself. And I know that for a fact that some people do. Some people collect like Japanese sharpening stones, the really hard to get, extremely rare sharpening stones, and then play with that on all the different steels that you have acquired or that you played with. You know, and just that alone, all that stuff is so much to make up the hobby that you could be busy for a lifetime. Then you've got the stuff like trading on the forums, buying, you know, researching your next knife. Like a lot of people just go and just search out all the new arrivals from like Blade HQ and other different dealers. There's so much that you could geek out on. And what grind, you could geek out on all the grinds, like what grind is the best for what tasks, blade thicknesses, what edge angle itself, finishing, like titanium finishing, like anodizing, and do you like a satin or a stone wash or an acid wash? There's Cerakote, DLC, there's just so much to learn about. You can start tying lanyards on knives and get into that. So from the outside looking in, all that stuff is really hard to understand until you're into it. And I think any hobby's like that, you know. And then the biggest part for me, and what seems like it's exploding, custom knives have always been huge. But I think in the last 5 years or so, like, everybody's modified a knife. If you've ever like laid back the edge on a knife, then I mean you are guilty of modifying a knife, really. I mean, it's not a huge modification, but you've got stuff like changing out the handles for more exotic handles. And then in that little subset, you also have the different, I'm not going to say pimpers, because I don't, that's a whole nother video. I don't know what you call it, customizers, I guess. Guys that do custom work on factory knives. Even some custom knives, but you know what I'm saying. So, from the outside looking in, it's like, yeah, how could that be a hobby? And then if you really look at it and you really get into it, you can really dig it. Because YouTube could be a hobby in and of itself. You know? Obviously, a lot of people do. In acquiring information through YouTube and just looking up useful videos. So, from the outside looking in, you wouldn't think there'd be so much, but when you actually get into it, there's so much to like and so much to learn about. I mean, there's something you can learn every day, and I'm sure most of us do. Just knife related. The different ways to open a knife, sharpening, what angle's best. I mean, what makes a knife work. Why is the Para 2 so sought after for an EDC knife? And then break it down and really look at it and study. Well, it's relatively thin, it's light, Flat ground blade cuts great. They come in every steel you can imagine, pretty much. And there's just a lot to like. So that's it. If you're new to knives, buckle up, because it's a crazy addiction. You will acquire more knives than you probably need. That's most of us, though. And that's part of the hobby. They store easy. Compared to some other hobbies like drag racing or building a show car or something. It's a relatively cheap hobby. So it's fun. I think it's constructive. I mean, at the end of the day, we all like useful tools, most of us. Some people really get into the art knife stuff, and that's fine. Fantasy stuff, that's fine too. There's so much to like, though, and I'm just glad to be a part of it. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll just wrap this up. Say see ya.